Dear, I'm glad as well for your invitation, because we are making each year a huge very work to change some trends in Slovenia, but we are not really successful yet. So I am dermatologist from General Hospital, and I would like to emphasize that I do believe in positive effects of prevention, but prevention in dermato-oncology is very hard to achieve. So today I would like to talk about this is not working. Skin cancers, which are in the group of most common cancers in the worldwide. And because I think that you are not mostly medical providers, I would explain that melanoma is a pigment skin cancer arising from pigment cell in the skin, which is in the border of uppermost layer of the skin, epidermis with dermis. And the most common skin cancers are from the epithelial group. And basal cell carcinoma is from basal cell keratinocyte epithelial cells on the basal layer, and squamous cell carcinoma is from upper side of keratinocytes, which are already a little bit developed. There are some other cancers, but are not so common and not so important today. So non-melanoma skin cancers are less invasive, but the majority of them have to be surgically excised. They are rising also in multiple ways, so at once and or in 1 year. There you can have many of them, and so they are a big burden also, not only for health system, also for patient. And melanoma is less prevalent, but among most lethal forms of cancer, and in skin cancer group, it's about 90% of deaths is because of melanoma. And the non-melanoma skin cancers also make troubles because of deformities and visible scars, because they appear mostly on visible places of the skin, so head and neck region and extremities. Many cancer registries do not collect data on non-melanoma keratinocyte skin cancers, because they are very common, but not so invasive. So we don't have really good data for international comparison. But for skin melanoma, because of his lethality, we have good data. And from this graph, you can see that Slovenia is above the European average incidence. Incidence means the number of new patients in 1 year. And in this case, the small pocket country is beneficial, because in Slovenia, we have a very well organized national cancer registry since 1950. It's one of the oldest in the world, and it collects data on skin cancers as well. And we can see from this graph that melanoma invasive form is increasing since early 18th in the previous century, and also from this century, non-invasive form of melanoma in situ melanoma is increasing as well. But non-melanoma skin cancers, keratinic epithelial skin cancers are rising fast since 1990s, the previous century. And as I said, non-melanoma skin cancers are mostly on visible regions, head and neck mostly, and skin melanoma at men mostly on trunk, and at women, female trunk and legs. And one of way of analyzing trends of melanoma is also the time trend. And in the start of this century, melanoma was on the 9th place of among 10 most often cancers in Slovenia. And in 10 years, it reached the 7th place at men and a little bit lower at for women, but now according to the data of Global Cancer Observatory, Globocan, in few years ago, it was already on the 5th place. So these are only the data for invasive form, not for in situ melanoma. So why this is the case? The dark side of the sun, there is also the skin cancers, and in fair-skinned populations, up to 95% of keratinocyte skin cancers and 70 to 95% of cutaneous melanoma are caused by ultraviolet radiation we cannot feel. So this big group theoretically could be prevented if we could hide our skin not to be exposed to UV radiation. You know better than me that UV radiation, it's only a small part of solar radiation. For me today, it's important that UV radiation of UVB spectrum can cause the DNA damage directly, and UVA, longer UV radiation, also can cause some free radicals and cellular oxidative stress. And this is accumulating during life and makes some visible effects. The short effects we all know is sunburn, but very delayed effects are hyperpigmentations like age spots in sun-age skin, and also photo-carcinogenesis. Action spectra for photo damage is mostly from UVB and UVA. Both are important because UVB is working directly to DNA, but UVA is going deeper to the skin. And accumulation of damage is important. So that through sunburns, photoimmune suppression, photoaging signs, we reach skin cancers of different types. UV radiation has the same effects independent of its source. It could be sun, or it could be solarium, or some other sources in industry. Different effects of UV radiation at the molecular level can cause visible responses, either quite quickly as sunburn. Anyway, it's delayed, 6 to 12 hours, and could be delayed for years or decades, like benign changes that cause wrinkles, some cysts, cell death that cause thickening of, and depigmentation, and some somatic mutations, which are the reason for skin cancers. And we can see that different UV exposure patterns are important for various types of skin cancers. For actinic keratosis, which are premalignant form and of squamous cell carcinomas, cumulative exposure is important. That means decades of moderate exposure to the sun. And intermittent, usually hard with sunburns, and also cumulative exposure is important for melanoma and basal cell carcinoma. So because of high level of certainty that UV radiation is carcinogenic to humans because we have sufficient evidence for cancer in humans. International Agency on Research for Cancer in 2009, UV radiation classified as a global one, a group 1 carcinogen, comparable to asbestos, tobacco smoking, and ionizing radiation. So what are the proofs of UV-related photocarcinogenation? These proofs are quite well established on different levels. First at epidemiological studies, and then studies on somatic mutations, and in last years also on animal models. Epidemiological studies, I will present mostly studies from international literature, show since 1950 that incidence and mortality of melanoma in fair-skinned population is higher, and this is especially pronounced in regions near the equator. The first place at the start was in Australia and New Zealand, and later they recognized the same pattern also in other places on the world where fair-skinned population is predominant. Melanoma is still important for public health because not only because of high incidence, but also disproportionate mortality in some other countries where the darker population is the case. Also in South America and Africa, and especially in some other countries where the health system is not so developed. We think that developed countries' recent moderation of mortality trends reached by better treatment and earlier diagnosis. It's not only the pale skin that it's important. We can see also that among risk factors for development of melanoma and non-melanoma skin cancers are also some factors that may be a result of exposure to UV radiation, like number of melanocytic neva and immunosuppression. Only a small part, about 1% of moles, that means melanocytic neva, are congenital. All other are acquired during our life. And if there are many of them, they recognized that the risk for cancers, especially melanoma, is higher. This research showed that people who have 100 neva, they have about 7 times higher risk for melanoma later. So among Caucasians, a fairly large body of evidence today suggests that the number of melanocytic neva represent a very good predictor for cutaneous melanoma, especially if they have different kinds of moles. Some are well-shaped, uniform colors, some are less shaped and with different colors, and these are called atypical neva, and atypical neva may play an independent role, because if only have a present one of them, there is 10 times higher risk for melanoma. So in conclusion, the risk of melanoma rises with increasing number and with clinical atypia of neva, from small risk in those with few common neva and higher risk in those with larger numbers of common neva, to a very high risk in those with multiple clinically atypical melanocytic neva. And why is this important? Because they showed that we got neva already in childhood. We can see in this graph that the number of neva is growing even in the preschool children, and it is independent, non-genetic risk factor for, for development of melanocytic moles if the number of days of sunny holidays and even the activity outdoors, not previous sunburns. So the conclusion of other research was the sunburns are not necessary for mole development and tanning of the skin is sufficient. And on the opposite, physical sun protection protects against mole development in childhood, especially if it's covered the most of the surface of the body with shirts, pants, and hat. And the use of sunscreen do not have protective effects on the mole development. So studies on somatic mutations show that skin cancers that are provoked by UV radiation have the greatest tumor burden amongst all solid cancers. For example, in this case, melanoma and squamous cell carcinoma of the skin have more mutations frequency than lung squamous carcinoma and head and neck squamous carcinoma. And I will skip faster. In animal studies, they also succeeded to provoked squamous cell carcinoma and recently also melanoma in animal models. So UVR is considered a complete carcinogen because it is working from the initial DNA damage to through the immunosuppression, persistent mutations to clonal cell expansion. And anyway, if it is implicated as a primary driver of pathogenesis of skin cancer, the etiology is multifactorial. So we can see that there are some genetic factors. Among them are hidden some which are not only genetic, but also influenced by UV exposure and its consequences, like sunburns, suntans, solar lentigo, actinic keratosis, and cancers, and immunosuppression we do usually not think upon. So solar UV radiation of the skin is depending on local UV climate. We know that UVB and A is higher in the noontime and in the summer, like June and July. And it has changed in the past, at least at some locations, like here in Glasgow. The square lion was growing already in the past, but also by the people's behaviors out of doors. You see that researchers find that the exposure to UV radiation and to sun was bigger in summer and also the highest on holidays. And in the past, the time trend of way of holidays showed in some places, this is the research in Great Britain, that also the people, they went to other places, mostly sunny places, in higher percentages than before. So time spent outdoors at work or in leisure time or holidays is important. And today, the researchers think that while climatic factors do influence levels of UV radiation, it's people's behavior outdoors that has a much greater impact on personal solar UV radiation exposure. We have possibilities to protect our skin, avoiding exposure around noon, seeking the shade, wearing cloths and hats, and use topical sunscreens. But it's a question, a key question, how to prevent people to get undressing when it got hot. It's easier to make this with older people who already have some troubles, but it's very difficult to change the way of young people, especially if because the skin cancer is so delayed. And I think that the health view, it's not the optimal possibility, that we should work on that at work safety first would be valuable also in our now bad examples, that means sportsmen, business sports, and that we should make again light the modern skin with light, not tan complexion. Thank you.